In March 1839, Charles LaTrobe, his wife, daughter, and 2 servants left England to come to Australia. LaTrobe had been appointed superintendent of the Port Phillip district in southern New South Wales. They arrived 4 months later in the Ferguson at Sydney. At that time, Sydney was the centre of government for the tiny settlement around Melbourne. LaTrobe had to take his instructions from Sir George Gipps, the Governor of New South Wales. Sydney was already a bustling city, but Melbourne, only 3 years old, was little more than a pioneering village. Although the Port Phillip district was the size of Great Britain, Melbourne had a population of less than 6,000, of which only 1/4 was female. Collins Street still had grass down its centre. Elizabeth Street was a gully with a creek that was dry only in summer, and Swanston Street was a bog. Despite the primitive conditions, the settlers of Port Phillip were enthusiastic about the potential of their little colony. Squatters were already exploiting the rich pastoral land, and as the sheep population rose, the wool industry flourished. Emigration was encouraged, and as new settlers came from Britain and Europe to find a new life and seek their fortunes, they contributed to the much-needed growth in population. The arrival of the new superintendent was observed from Flagstaff Hill. His landing, however, was delayed by a storm, and when the rain subsided, the official party was rowed up the Yarra. There was no landing stage, and they had to scramble ashore. LaTrobe was sworn in as superintendent of the Port Phillip district at a sales room in Collins Street. LaTrobe's eagerly awaited arrival was celebrated with parties, bonfires, fireworks, and the firing of pistols and guns. The Port Phillip Patriot declared, "He has come to found a mighty empire." The colonial government did not provide LaTrobe with an official residence, so he purchased 12.5 acres of land in East Melbourne, which became known as Jolimont. Here was erected the prefabricated house that he had brought with him from England, and which quickly became the social centre of the small settlement. Eventually, LaTrobe had at least 3 cottages and outbuildings at Jolimont, together with a pleasing garden. The rapidly expanding colony had many problems and grievances. It lacked public buildings, amenities, roads, bridges, and police. The Port Phillip colonists resented being dependent on the far-off government of Sydney, which neglected their needs for funds to develop their community. As early as 1840, the Port Phillip settlers had formed an active separation association to press the English government for the separation of Port Phillip from New South Wales. Finally, on the 1st of July, 1851, the district of Port Phillip became a separate colony, named after the Queen, Victoria. LaTrobe became the first Lieutenant Governor, and an independent government was formed. The highlight of the separation celebrations was the opening of the first bridge to span the Yarra. It was named Prince's Bridge, after Queen Victoria's infant son. Of significance to the Port Phillip colonists was the convict question. While more men were needed to reduce the shortage of labour in the district, most citizens of Melbourne strongly objected to the importation of convict labour and were opposed to transportation. Although some convicts had been brought in from across Bass Strait in 1844, when a shipload of convicts was sent straight from England to Port Phillip in 1847, the local citizens threatened to use violence to prevent the convicts from landing. Fearing outright rebellion against the British government, LaTrobe sent the convict ship, the Randolph, onto Sydney and turned the next shipload back at the Heads. Until the end of his governorship, LaTrobe opposed the large-scale transportation of convicts into Victoria. European settlement in the Port Phillip district profoundly affected the original inhabitants, the Aborigines. When Batman first landed in Port Phillip, there were nearly 10,000 Aborigines in the district. Less than 12 years later, barely 1/4 had survived. LaTrobe and many well-meaning colonists were very active in taking steps to protect the Aborigines. However, the introduction of new diseases, alcohol, the loss of their land and traditional way of life rapidly decimated the Aboriginal community in Victoria. There were other tragedies in Victoria during LaTrobe's office. The summer of 1850 and 1851 had been exceedingly hot, and in February a devastating bushfire broke out. There were 10 known deaths and probably many more unknown. This natural disaster was called Black Thursday. Not long after, the discovery of gold in New South Wales was officially announced. The citizens of Victoria joined the rush to Bathurst, and the colony might have lost all its citizens if gold had not also been found in Victoria at Clunes, Buninyong and Ballarat. During the Golden 50s, Melbourne, like many other areas, was deserted in the rush to the goldfields of Bendigo and Ballarat. Governor LaTrobe was faced with a serious problem. In October 1851, he wrote to the Colonial Office in England. Within the last 3 weeks, the town of Melbourne and Geelong and their large suburbs have almost been emptied of many classes of their male inhabitants. Cottages are deserted, houses to let, business is at a standstill, and even schools are closed. In some of the suburbs, not a man is left. Even the police force lost most of its members, and it's a wonder that LaTrobe was able to find anyone to take his letter to England. The government, with LaTrobe's approval, introduced a digger's licence fee of 30 shillings a month. This fee was strongly opposed by the diggers, many of whom could not afford to pay, and it ultimately led to the bloody Battle of the Eureka Stockade in December 1854, just 7 months after LaTrobe had left the colony. Conditions on the fields were very primitive. Diggers lived in tents or bark huts, or found protection from a few yards of calico stretched between poles. Most of the diggers worked in teams of 4 to 6, labouring from early morning until dark. While some diggers made their fortunes, others were ruined. Escaped convicts from New South Wales were attracted to the goldfields and frequently turned to bushranging. Gold stealing and crime on the goldfields became an enormous problem. Having incurred the displeasure of the British government by refusing to support its policy of sending convicts to Victoria, and facing unpopularity with the people because of clashes between the law and the thousands of people on the goldfields, LaTrobe offered his resignation to the Colonial Office. However, he did not leave the colony until 1854. When LaTrobe left Victoria after nearly 15 years, the population had grown to an independent colony of over 250,000 Victorians, and Melbourne had become the principal port in Australia. He sailed to England in a ship called the Golden Age, and it was indeed Victoria's golden age that had arrived under LaTrobe. Money from the goldfields had paved the streets, erected beautiful buildings, and turned a pioneering village into a bustling city of fashion and entertainment. There were now more shops, theatres, balls. There were picnics in the new gardens, and sporting events other than kangaroo hunting. Races and cricket matches were social events. Schools and churches, government buildings, and private mansions adorned the young city. LaTrobe supported every project possible for the religion, culture, entertainment, comfort, and education of Victorians. St. Francis Church, St. James Old Cathedral, St. Peter's Church, Eastern Hill, the Baptist Church, the Old Custom House, the Old Melbourne Jail, the restored and removed LaTrobe's Cottage, and the land grant from the site of the public library founded by Sir Redmond Barry all date from this period. In addition, large areas of land were set aside for parks and gardens, including the magnificent Botanic Gardens, the Flagstaff Gardens, and Royal Park. LaTrobe's greatest achievement was to maintain stability and avoid chaos, rebellion, and civil war in the crises caused by the lack of finance and amenities for a rapidly growing population. and also by the disruption and lawlessness caused by the gold rush. As LaTrobe later wrote, "None can know how difficult but those who were in that fierce struggle for the maintenance of order under so many disadvantages."